I thought I could feel it. I'll go with you.
Oh, sorry.
It's a 50-cent act. And it's for a penny, right?
Hey guys,
No, penny, dime, nickel, I think. Wow.
Probably. Is everyone awake now? Okay, the reason we're moving backwards is quite simple. It's because our valley here is too narrow to turn the train around. Wave to the boys in the yard.
Bye.
Makes the whole thing. It's so narrow, in fact, that we can't even turn our engines around. And the railroad you're riding today is a reconstructed portion of the old Colorado and Southern. It last operated from Denver to Silver Plume back in 1939. The first railroad in this area was the Colorado Central. It began construction down in Denver in 1870, wound its way up through the towns of Arvada, Golden, Idaho Springs, and finally reached Georgetown in 1877. Shortly thereafter, the Georgetown, Breckenridge, and Leadville Railroad, or the GB&L, was formed. The plan was to continue the tracks beyond Silver Plume to the Continental Divide, tunnel through the divide, and reach the rich mining towns of Leadville and Breckenridge on the other side. However, the GB&L was able to acquire a line that reached those towns from a different direction and came down from the south. So that tunnel was not needed. The lines were cut back to Silver Plume, and we began what's known as a stub and branch line. Off on the left-hand side, you will soon see beautiful Clear Creek tumbling down the valley. Okay, this is icy cold water. This water starts as snow on the top of the Continental Divide, finds its way down our valley, all the way to Denver. Denver joins the Platte River. The Platte takes that water to the Missouri. Missouri takes it to the Mississippi. The Mississippi takes that snowmelt all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico.
Mom.
Okay. Okay, although we were just a stub and branch line, this railroad was actually quite profitable in its early days. It brought miners, their families, and supplies up from the city of Denver to the little towns of Georgetown and Silver Plume. It brought the rich ore back down to Golden and Denver for processing. This continued on until 1893. In 1893, the Sherman-Silver Purchase Act was repealed. So what happened then was the government no longer was going to back currency with both silver and gold. They switched to strictly a gold standard. So the price of silver plummeted. These mines in this area primarily shut down almost overnight. It was not to do with a lack of silver. There's plenty of silver in the ground. It just had to do with the fact that that silver was no longer worth mining. another form of revenue, and it found that revenue in the form of tourism. It was considered quite fashionable in the day to jump on the train down there in Denver, ride up over the loop, get off and have a picnic lunch up in Silver Plume, back on the train and be home in Denver in time for supper. Thousands came to ride what was considered a scenic and engineering marvel. This heavy tourism continued into the early 1900s with as many as 7 trains a day riding up here from the city. However, in the 1920s, automobiles were beginning to take over as the preferred method of transportation. Passenger service dwindled, and in 1927, it was so poor that passenger service was discontinued altogether. The railroad continued to run freight trains, a couple of trains a week for several more years. However, by the mid-1930s, even that business was so poor that the railroad had to file for abandonment. Then between the years of 1939 and 1941, all the rails from Silver Plume east to Golden were pulled up and sold for scrap. In our early 1960s, the Highway Department began planning the interstate system up through this valley. The original plan would have taken the highway right up through the middle of this railroad grade, thus destroying it and all the rich mining history that this valley contained. Well, the Colorado Historical Society felt that this history was worth preserving, so they began working with the Highway Department and convinced them to locate the interstate over there on the north side of the valley at the base of Republican Mountain, which is where you see it today. Then in 1973, that same Historical Society began reconstructing the rails from Silver Plume back down to Georgetown. In 1983, construction on the new High Bridge was started. It was completed in 1984 and reopened in 1985 for tourism and have been running continually ever since. The next warning whistle that we're going to hear will be for what we call the high fill curve. This curve was the most labor-intensive portion of the rail to build. It will turn us 180 degrees, and it is built on a 4.5% descending grade, this next section of track. This is the steepest portion of our rail. It took them over 4 seasons, 4 summers to build this curve alone, as all this dirt and fill had to be brought in by wagon loads. What a 4% descending grade means is for every 100 feet of forward travel, we are dropping 4 feet in elevation. Once you clear the trees, you look off to the right, you'll see the High Bridge way down there in the distance. And if you look off to the left, you'll see this big, flat, bowl-shaped area. Well, try to remember back 100 years ago, there were no trees here. All of this had been clear-cut, as there were about 2,000 people living in Silver Plume and about 5,000 people living in Georgetown. So very different than it is today. All of this timber had been cut down to build cabins for use in the mines, for firewood, and for use on the railroads. So this area was all clear-cut, and in this big, flat area, the miners actually built themselves a baseball diamond. And then the one day a week that they were not out down in the mines working, it's usually Sunday, they would bring their families over here, they'd have picnics, and they would play baseball together. We like to think they were the original minor leagues.
Oh boy.
The railroad you're riding today is a narrow gauge railroad. What that means is that the rails are only 3 feet apart. Standard gauge in this country is 4 feet 8.5 inches. Narrow gauge was primarily used in the mountains for the obvious reasons that they could negotiate tighter turns. The cars could be smaller, so therefore it was easier for the engines to pull them up these steep mountain grades. And also it was easier to build the railroad bed itself through these boulder fields. Now remember, in the 1880s, we had no heavy equipment to help move these boulders. These rocks had to be hand drilled, packed with black powder, and then blasted into pieces that were small enough to be moved by men and horse teams. Mining was very difficult and dangerous work. The average lifespan of a miner back in those days was only about 40 years. So therefore, it stands to reason that you entered the workforce at a much younger age. Typically, it was children between the ages of 10 and 14 that were used to light these charges. The children were smaller, lighter, more nimble on their feet. They were quicker than their adult counterparts. So they were the ones that were used to light the charges. These children became known as powder monkeys.
I think you would have fit in well.
Yeah. Yeah, that whistle tells us that we're going to go around this blind curve and over the Pin Truss Bridge. If you look up to the left, you'll see some pretty waterfalls. You'll want to hold your cameras up, otherwise you'll get a picture of the rail and the bridge, which is also pretty, but it's probably not what you were aiming at. And then we're about to enter an area that we call the Cut. You'll notice rock retaining walls. These can be found all over Clear Creek's valleys and towns. They were built by Cornish miners in the 1880s without the use of mortar. They're used a method called dry stoning or dry stacking. These walls are put together like a giant jigsaw puzzle. The retaining bolts you see were put in about 10 years ago by us just to ensure stability on that section. Quite a testament to the craftsmanship back in those days. All right, we are going to be stopping here at our Lebanon station. For anyone that has a mine tour, this is your stop. I want you to wait until you hear a single blast on the whistle. That will tell you that the train has come to a complete stop. Hi. Gather all your possessions as other people will be boarding the train in your absence, okay? And please pull out your tickets so that the mine tour guides can know which tour to put you on. They just want to get a quick look at them as you get off the train.